He aha te hau e wawara mai. He tiu he raki, he tiu he raki. Nāna ia mai te puputara ki hikiota. E tikina e au te kōtiu ko i te pauwhakaroka tū ki te Waitemata i oku wairangi e. E ti he wā Māori ora. E aku nui, e aku rahi, e aku raukura, puta noa te motu, puta noa te ao nei hoki, nau mai, hara mai, whakatau mai. Nau mai ki tēnei kaupapa nui, i roti te pari rau o ngā Taniwha, nau mai. Hara mai ki tēnei wāhi o tātou, tō koutou wānanga, tō tātou wānanga. E whakatau mai ki waipapa taumata rau. Ko te tuatahi, me wehe ki te atua, ko i te timatatanga me te whakautinga o ngā mea katoa. Ko te tuarua, tikana me mihi atu ki te kingi tūheitia, e noho ana ia i te ahurawa tapu. Ki ngā mate, haere atu rā. Haere i runga i tērā waka a tamarereti, e noho mārika ki te taha o te kāinga o te kaihanga, e ngā mate katoa haere atu rā. A rātou ki a rātou ko wheti rangitia, tātou ki a tātou noho mai nei ki te Aotearoa, a tēnā koutou katoa. Nō ki te honari ki te tuku mihi ki a koutou, mo te tari o te PVC Māori, mo te tari o te Vice Chancellor hoki, e mihi atu ki a koutou i mo i tēnei kaupapa. A tēnā koutou katoa. Ka huri au ki tērā o ngā reo, ka haka māra mai tātou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my privilege, on behalf of the Pro-Vice Chancellor Māori Office and of the Vice Chancellor here at the University of Auckland, or Waipapa Taumata Rau, to welcome you all here today, and it's a privilege on behalf of ngā Taniwha and as an alumni myself of the University of Auckland to be able to offer these words. After this message, I'll be handing over the rākau to our chair, Dan Walker. Whenua, i mui i tēnā, e tiki ana me mihi atu ahau ki a koutou katoa. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, a tēnā tātou katoa.
E honori e kurore ke te atua i maunga rongo ki te Whenua e wakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa a o koa no wea, a o koa no wei, te e Māori ora. A tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, a ku rangatira, ko ui mai nei, tēnei ui a ngā Taniwha, te kaupapa hei o cultural tax. Tuatahi e mihi ana ki a koe te rangatira Mike, mō tō wakatau ki a tātou. Ngā mihi nui ki Ngāti Whātua ki o rākei mō koutou manaki me te ake o ngā tangata no konei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone. Welcome to Ngā Taniwha, the Māori alumni. My name is Dan Walker. We are the Ngā Taniwha Māori alumni of University of Auckland, launched in June 2015 with the goal of advancing Māori business and strengthening the Māori economy through worldwide knowledge, education and information networks. We have more than 10,000 Māori alumni in New Zealand and around the world, some of the who's who of te ao Māori. Ngā Taniwha plays an important role in connecting these awesome whānau together and ensuring our voices, our Māori voices and our values are elevated and reflected within the university. I'm also proud to announce for the University of Auckland, they are working on a new Māori engagement strategy that will provide a high-level vision and increased commitment to iwi relationships as well as obligations to te tiriti o Waitangi. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ngā Taniwha exec for their mahi on this project, Amber, Manuhiri and Joe McNaughton. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So, what is cultural tax? Whānau, that's why we're here today. There's lots of theories out there, lots of academia that's been around since 1994, but it talks about this cultural load that exists on our Indigenous people in many different ways, not just business, although we're talking about business today, but also in many other areas of our society. But if we look at business in particular, and the NZX 100, some of our largest companies in Aotearoa, we don't see ourselves reflected in those CEOs. We don't see ourselves reflected in many of the leadership roles within those spaces. Yet, we see ourselves reflected in different ways, where we become the head of Māori, or we become where they're starting to try and look at ways to engage with Māori, yet they still can marginalise us. So that's the kaupapa of what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to introduce our panel, esteemed panel. Nō reira, kia koe te rangatira, Kirstin. Nau mai, haere mai. Ko wai koe.
O tēnā koe te rangatira e tēn, o tira tēnā koutou e mātakitaki mai ana i te ahi pōnei, me ki tēnā tātou katoa, i aku hoa i runga i te pai. I te tahu o tōku pāpā, ko pirongia te maunga, ko waipā te awa, ko tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Mahanga, me Ngāti Hikairo ngā hapu, ko te paporotu me pūrekere ki ngā marae. Te tahu o tōku whaia, no Hāmua, e tahi o ku tūpuna, hoi anō, anō hoki ko Tiheia me whakapau ngā kau ngā maunga, ko Waiohiwa me te awa hau ngā awa, ko te aroa te waka, ko Ngāti Rangi Wewehi me Ngāti Rangi te aorere ngā hapu, ngari tipu aki au, kei tāmaki makaurau, nā reira me mihi ka tika ki te maunga kieke, me te wai o te waitemata, ki te waka o māhuhu ki te rangi me ngā hapu e toru, ko te uringutu, te tāu, ko ngā oho, me te marae o Ōrākei, ko Kirstin te wao, tōku ingoa, ko au te pauwhaka whanake Māori ki Vodafone Aotearoa, nā reira tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ore hoa, ngā mihi, nau mai harap mai. Kia koe e te rangatira. Ko wai koe.
Kia ora wala. Uri au no Ngāti Manawa, Ngāti Whare e tū hoi, me Ngāti Porou, ko Henare Johnson taku ingoa, no anau ki, konei ki Tāmaki, mo te wāroa, te tūmanako pirani au te ki te kaina, whai orana, no reira tēnei au, me atu ki a koe, whakatūwhera, whakarite i tēnei kaupapa. Kia ora pēu.
Kia ora, kia ora. Ngā mihi hoa.
Rangatira.
Kia ora Fonteyn.
Kia ora, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ko Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Mariapoto, Ngāi Tahu, Ngā iwi, ko Fonteyn, tōku ingoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora. So, to kick us off, I'd like to put it out to the panellists about what they believe cultural tax means to them and how they see it reflected in society today. So we'll start with yourself, Iho.
Kia ora. I think from my perspective, cultural tax is the emotional, the spiritual, the mental and the physical toll that is paid when our whakapapa and our cultural knowledge systems are drawn on by others who lack that understanding without the intention of reciprocation.
Oosh.
So, and we see that played out in lots of different ways. I mean, we've all got different experiences of what that looks like, but if I can give one quick example that's happened in my time, in my work life, it's been, I guess the way I describe it is a little bit diala Māori. I've got these VIPs coming from overseas. Kirstin, can you organise your kapahaka team or the kapahaka team to come and sing a song for them? And you sit there and you go, okay. So there's a moment that you've got to digest that situation playing out and then kind of digest how you respond and react to that. And then you go through a process of educating. Kia ora. Well, and for me, it always starts with, well, why do you want this? Tell me why you want this. And if we did this, what does it mean for you? And actually, how are you going to contribute to the betterment of our kapahaka team? And what are you going to do to increase your understanding of the right way to engage? So, that's only one small example of many, but it's about, I guess, my response and our response where I work is about educating and going, actually, this is the tikanga. You build a relationship, and from that you'll be able to engage and we'll come and tautoko you, and it's reciprocal.
Kia ora. And Fonteyn, in your role, how have you seen cultural tax being realised?
I think so. I've been with many corporates, and I think in New Zealand, when people see as Māori, they go, actually, we're helping you. So they don't see it as a taxing role, they see it as a supporting role.
Kia ora, yeah.
So they go, oh, because you're Māori, this shows that we support you. Yeah. You're like, yeah, no.
Aren't you happy?
Aren't you happy? Yeah. Well, you want us to pay you. What? So that part, that's the taxing part. The taxing part is the pressure that is put on by colleagues who really do think that they are supporting you and helping the organisation to actually accept and embrace Māori. So the cultural text of that is what you know is that your sense of responsibility in reacting to that, and also the whakapapa that you go, okay, so yeah, you go home and they go, oh, you know this. So when I was looking at this role for Westpac, my whānau said to me, they took us 3 months to negotiate my whānau to work for a bank. They said, oh, you know, it's an evil corporate, so you can't go. Oh, can we redress that? You know, can we have a look at that? Yeah. And so 3 months of negotiating with my whānau to actually go into a temporary role because of what they saw as the taxing of a corporate into our life as Māori. Because they said, it's not just you. You bring it home, we get involved. It's the value system that we have that actually is embodied into the place that you go into. And it's not separated. So, you know, as an example, I go back home to my marae, they go, hey, Mrs. Westpac. It's like, oh, come on, cousins, what are you doing to me? You know, or else you go somewhere and they go, oh, what do you do? So I'm a hairdresser. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So it's kind of that. So I think what Kirstin said really nailed it in regards to that point where your colleagues go, you know, dial Māori. But in some ways, they're that unintended harm that is caused because they believe in their hearts they're doing what's right, but they're not actually doing it the right way.
Kia ora. Bro, the first time I heard cultural tax was actually by you. It was a year ago. I know you said that you'd heard it from somewhere else as well, but yeah, I really liked the way you talked about it and how you brought it to life for me. Mātakita, yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, true, bro. So, yeah, when I first heard cultural tax, I was like, man, do I have to pay something else? I'm prepared paying normal tax. And so when I heard of this cultural tax, I was like, wow, they can't really take much more from us. And so it just got me thinking about, like, what have I... And I've got 100 and 100, man, I've got 200 examples of my experiences just going through cultural tax. And we'll probably go into all of these. So if we run out of questions, but I'll just fill in with these stories. But
nice.
200,
300.
Light.
But yeah, I think cultural tax for me is just that. Same with what's already been said. It's that you go into a role as in whatever it is, and because you're this Māori role, and what's awesome in the last 10 years, Aotearoa wants to celebrate. And so you're like, oh, so for example, my first example, I was working for Tourism New Zealand and got there and they said, oh, middle of the year, and they were like, oh, you're new here? Well, how about we celebrate Māori New Year? And I was like, I've never celebrated that. What was that? And they go, it's Matariki. And they were like, oh, yeah. Cool, I'll celebrate Matariki. So I had to ring up my uncle. I was like, what's Matariki? And he was like, who's Matariki? And I was like, you know, what's Matariki? They reckon that it happens at this time of the year. And he reckons, I don't know who Matariki is, but she must have been born around, I don't know. But that got me into this thing as first time I'd ever experienced this. Another culture wanting to celebrate Māori culture, but then putting on to you, oh, you're Māori, you should know this stuff.
Yes.
So I think that's what I understand as cultural tax, and every time I go through an experience of cultural tax, the definition keeps evolving. So yeah, that's probably my paku whakamārama, bro.
Cool. You know, and I think from my personal experience, there's a lot of you know, these board roles, there's all these sort of different experiences where people, you know, they want your help to have you represented, to have Māori represented, but yet that you can't control a big company or an organisation who will go out into the community and do something, and then, you know, you feel the mamai for that. They may not feel it either. They're like, oh, it's all right, it's okay, but actually, you know, you're the one reflecting your whānau, your hapu, your iwi, and you're worried about how this is going to reflect on everyone else as well. Have you got any of you experienced anything like that where maybe your organisation has done stuff that you like, made you really wakamā, or you felt really pouty about it?
Well, I work in a bank, so I can start there. Oh yeah. So what it's interesting. So for me, I was talking to Sasha McMeekin, and like for me, she's got the biggest brain that's kind of walking around at the moment. And
True.
I was talking to her about cultural tax, and she said, well, you know, surely it's about who pays it. And she said, if the corporate is paying the corporate tax, then you are the beneficiary of whatever comes through that. And I went, okay, that's interesting. What she was talking about is, you know, when I was started in a role and I was in credit, then the expectation for me was that I manage all these applications, I'm a credit specialist. But then at that time it was UDC Finance, they said, oh yeah, but why don't we set up the special Māori unit so that then we can actually apply a different lens towards how we process. Because, you know, we process these loans based on 3 years, you should be returning something. Whereas Māori landowners go 3 years, that's like the first time you're going to replant grass,
yeah,
you know, if you're
sure.
lucky. So they said, you know, for asset finance, we've got to look at a different model to be able to support Māori landowners. And at that point, I mean, sure, you know, like, so then I could see the benefit of actually being Māori and supporting Māori landowners to be able to get what they want, which is a change in the process. And I suppose for me, what Sasha raised for me is how do I use my position or any position I have in an organisation to influence that organisation for the benefit of Māori. And in banking, it's a system change. You know, so how do you change the system to provide whānau with access to finance? That's my role. So, you know, if the system's not doing it or there's something broken, then how do I enact and support whānau to be able to get access to that?
Cool.
You know, the taxing part is when I don't do it.
Yeah. But you can use that system for benefits. Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that's how you get the benefits, you know. So, but you know, in my role, wasn't helpful when Westpac took one of our whānau trusts to court, and my nana's a shareholder. Not helpful. Oh. You know, I'm like, oh, I was like, that's not a very good welcoming present. No. You know, I've got to live with my nana. So, but you know, like, so those kind of examples, and as you said, when the organisation does really well, so, you know, we've got shared home ownership and a contemporary papakainga project, then, you know, that's a different feel good as well, because then, you know, the whānau go, actually, we can see how that's of benefit to us, and that's okay.
Awesome, awesome. What about this issue of leadership, the fact that we don't have ourselves reflected in leadership roles? What do you think that's about? Big pātaia, sorry, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. So not having enough of us in leadership roles. I think one of the, well, might be the wrong way to say it, but one of the issues is ourselves, and totally believing in, well, it's a correct whakatauki, ara te kare te kumare kōrero ana mo tōna reka, but of course, a kumara doesn't talk because it doesn't have a mouth, but the gardener can talk about the kumara. So if we just look at ourselves as a gardener, and these are all the fruits. So when I first started with, you know, you give your koha. When we go start in a new role, your iwi go with you to give you as the koha. And so when I first started with one organisation, they rang me up. And they said, yep, you got the job. I was like, woohoo, first job in my life. The second question they asked is, oh, well, because you're Māori, do you want a normal welcome or pōhiri? And I was like, well, I don't know, Māori, might as well we'll go with the pōhiri. So I told my whānau, and I was like, oh yeah, so they're going to do a pōhiri. And this was down in Christchurch, and a lot of the whānau couldn't actually afford to, you know, get from one side of Christchurch to the other side. So we did a big fundraiser. And we had scheduled it all in. The organisation rang me back up and they said, well, we've got the pōhiri, how many of you are coming? I was like, and they go, maybe about 3, 4. And I was like, oh, I think we're up to about 50. And so we fundraised to get everybody up there, and then taking the whānau in there. And when they looked at the organisation, they actually told me, because I was just excited to have a job, but they told me, hey, will you be all right here? Because there's none of us on that side, and we don't see too many of our faces on that side to be able to look after you. So it wasn't really me, I can look after myself, but the whānau were more worried for me because of is this young fella at the time gonna be have the same type of manaki that we can have for them. So I think going back to the question, you know, what's the challenge for us in those leadership roles? One is we don't talk about ourselves, but we can if we just look at it from a different light. And the other one is when we're going for those roles, it's not just us making the decision for ourselves, but our family. So we need to make the right decision, not just for ourselves. I think that's something that's missed in the Western world, is making a decision for the individual for your own benefit, or making a decision for your benefit that will benefit others. And that's probably a big thing missing in HR right across corporate New Zealand.
Yeah. Oh, good point, bro. And yourself, Hall, you get any thoughts around that?
If I just build on what Nadia's saying, then you know one of the terms that I often hear is, "Oh, you're the token Māori," or "You're the token woman." And I remember being at a networking event, and it was a Māori networking event, and I was new in my role leading diversity and inclusion, and a new contact that I just met at that hui came up to me, and I explained what I was doing, and he goes to me, "So Kirstin, tell me what it feels like to be the token Māori there at Vodafone." And I was quite shocked.
Yeah.
Like, why would you even say that? But it was from that moment, that was a defining moment that I'll always remember, because what it did for me later on is it said to me, it helped me remember that I'm not a token, I'm a taonga, and the organisation is lucky to have me because of the cultural knowledge that I bring, because of the way that I was raised and the values that I've been instilled with. And if there's something, building on Nadia's point about, you know, sometimes we're our own barrier to progressing, then actually, you know, that's a way that we can flip the cultural tax that we pay, is actually standing in our mana, because we stand on the shoulders of, you know, of many of our ancestors that helped us get to where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I look at, I looked at some of the research, and they talked about, well, one of them is definitely ourselves, and the fact that, you know, we don't see ourselves reflected in, you know, the CEOs of New Zealand. So then we don't put ourselves out there. We say, well, we can't do it. But the other one is some of those values piece as well. You know, you go into a corporate, like one of the biggest banks in Australasia, and their goals are very financial. You know, so what do you guys think about that values piece for Māori going into corporate? Is that something that you've experienced yourself in terms of a misalignment of values, being a part of the cultural text too?
You know, the purpose statement when I started with Westpac is to be loved.
Right.
So I was like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, so that was the purpose statement, and so there was their vision, and the purpose statement was actually to realise the dreams of others.
Right.
You know, and so for me and then their values for the bank were, you know, working as one, to listen. So the values at that point aligned. It was the execution of those values in everything that they did. You know, it was the kotahitanga, but you had internal politics, and salespeople are ferocious. You know, it's like, HR, sure, hugs, kisses, don't touch my stuff. You know, it's like, it's not just a corporate thing, it's a people thing, you know what I mean? It's the enactment of those. So that's why my whānau took 3 months. So, but also, I mean, going on that leadership chat, so I went to my uncles, I went to iwi, I consulted wide and far to say, you know, hey, look, I'm going to Westpac. And my uncle said to me, well, I'd rather have you in there making changes than out in the courtyard with a placard. You know, so he said, or he also said, you know, like, that's where you get change, and you are a part of that part. And so there was a responsibility that our whānau gave to us, or gave to me when I walked in, and that was, you know, the instilling of the values that they had was to enact those into the community. And, you know, you kind of, like for me, I went right hard, you know, it's like I'm leading this. And what I realised is that they gave me the room to lead, so supported at CEO level, supported at executive level, you know, the manager, it was the middle part that we were all a little bit interesting, and that we're not resisting change, you know, like that mindset change. And so that was the hardest part. So they go, yeah, Fonteyn, why don't you lead that? And you go, yeah. So I was so enthusiastic. I'd be running and they'd be at the door going, how long do you think she'll last? You know, and I'd be like, what's happening here? And so it wasn't some, you know, like, so you had this mismatch of values, purpose and vision,
and the enactment
of it, and then what the community of whānau felt from that. So, and so, you know, that's the part where, you know, like I've been at Westpac for 9 years and watched this like material change.
Cool.
But some of that had to be like, to Henare's point, some of that mindset change is your own. So when I started, it was like, yep, I'm going to do this. I did not want to lead because I did not see the values transferring into and how that was enacting. And then got this mentor who's, you know, one of the GMs, and she helped me to actually change my mindset to just really believe in, okay, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'm an enabler, I'm a connector. She said, then do it, you know, and you can still lead and be one of the most influential people in the organisations without having to be tier 1 or 2. She said, that's a corporate way of looking at leadership and influence. You know, that doesn't mean that that's not how we see you. So.
Yeah, it's probably just on that, but it's also where, like, what is leader? Like, corporate world, it's like top of the pyramid, everybody kind of like ala or whatever. Where earlier this year we got a new CEO come on board, awesome, gonna say dude, awesome fella. And then his first engagement formally was going on to the marae, and wanted 25 years out of the country. Was like, came back and was like, well, this Aotearoa doesn't look like the New Zealand I left. So he had to have somebody guide him onto the marae, because most of the cultural skills was in the marae for the organisation. So we enabled this young intern, just doing a couple of months with us, and we said, well, he's going to be guiding you onto the marae. He was fine with it. But it was that middle management going, oh, that's just an intern, you need to go somebody more senior. And I was like, well, if you've got somebody more senior than 24 years spent on the marae, then let me know. But otherwise, your role is to follow the CEO, and the young fella is your leader for the day. So that particular day, the young fella was the top of the pyramid for the CEO. So and then for the rest of our Air New Zealand staff that were in the marae, to see someone reflected in them being able to guide the CEO, that was for them that day, there was leadership. So we probably just need to understand and define what leadership looks like for us, because it's not just at the top of their pyramid.
Nowhere. And actually, you raised a good point, Fonteyn, around mentorship. And that was another thing, the reason why a lot of Māori don't rise through the ranks, apparently. You know, they're saying that they might rise, but the good ones, they might get stolen from the iwi, or you know, they may be taken to other areas where those maybe the Māori contribution, what they can do for Māori, is bigger. So that piece on mentorship, how do we get that right around making sure Māori are properly mentored through and pull through into those leadership positions? So
I think so for me, some of it was that the GM had this epiphany, and I'm just old and cynical. Do I take a box? Am I leaving? Is this a cardboard box moment? And she says, I had this epiphany, come and have a coffee. And I said, sure. Okay, do I take the box? Okay, no, I'll be positive. I'll leave it at the door. And so I had this coffee with her. And she said, what I realised is that we were trying to transform you to be like the machine rather than the machine to transform to be of use to the community. So she said, you know, she said, what I'd like is for you, I will mentor you to understand this machine, to enable it to transform. What I'd like from you is for you to be my mentor, so I can ask you about the world of tā Māori and understand what's happening.
I love that. That's way better than...
Yeah, well, it was a good epiphany. I mean, yeah, I'm good.
Cool.
But sometimes that's the thing that happens, like because you're trying to change a value system of people who don't understand our values. And yet and what she realised is that we had this iwi hui, consortium hui on housing, and what she heard wasn't how iwi felt about housing, it was how iwi felt about whānau and homes. And we've got the story wrong. So how do we transform to be able to do that? And I'm not saying that we're there, but there was a good epiphany that she had, which enabled change.
Cool. Okay, whānau, so we've kind of been saying what does cultural tax mean to you. This next stage is to sort of think about, well, how you made that cultural tax work for you. We've actually been covering some of that already, so that's all. It's awesome. But maybe we'll pass it to you, Hoa, to talk about how you have made that cultural tax work for you, Kirstin.
Pai. Well, we've had a really exciting week at Vodafone. On Monday we announced a strategic partnership with Te Runanga o Ngaitahu that looks to increase digital connectivity for the iwi, increase Māori participation in our sector and create positive outcomes for young people. And to go back to your previous pātai, which was, you know, Western values around commercial outcomes, I think the opportunity is for corporates to think about relationships in a more holistic way. So not only the commercial outcome, but what are the environmental, the social and the cultural outcomes. You know, it's our normal multiple bottom lines that we know and live by, and just creating the space for those conversations and those actions to be demonstrated. And one thing that, you know, a catalyst for us has been the onboarding of our new CEO, well, not new anymore, he's been with us for 2 years now, but Jason Paris, and him coming on board, coupled with Vodafone being sold from the group global mothership, I call it, to Infratil New Zealand and Brookfield, meant a focus on Aotearoa. And with that came the space for my role as Head of Māori Development to be created. And in the past year, I had my 1 year work anniversary last week.
Oh,
nice.
Reflecting on that, it's been pretty cool.
Congrats, man. You've done so much.
And we've done a lot, like with that endorsement and with that mandate. So announcing our policy that honours the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi in July as part of Matariki. That kind of everything that we do now traces back to that. And so if our goal is to be a trusted digital partner for Māori, that's actually based on enduring, meaningful relationships. And so treaty policy, Whāriki here is our Māori development strategy that has 4 different po within it, but intergenerational planning and practice, developing and fostering digital pathways for Māori into the sector, uplifting organisational culture, capability and reputation to turbo boost Māori business success is kind of what that looks like in a nutshell. So that's been kind of I think the point of difference for Vodafone that I'm seeing at the moment is that it's an organisation-wide strategy that we're rolling out, but it starts with capability and building the understanding and empowering our leaders with the knowledge so that they can go off and do the mahi in their own streams of work. And you know, and the Vodafone Aotearoa network ID change that happened last month and blew up, and we had our mates at Spark and 2 Degrees jump on board that waka. That was, you know, like, our industry came together for Te Reo Māori, and I'm like, yes, that was awesome. So there's some cool stuff that was happening. And just one, I guess, from an individual story is, you know, I had the privilege of leading diversity and inclusion for a few years, and with that came some research, knowing that actually women what are the words I'm looking for out of my whānau? So pay gaps, gender pay gaps, and layer on intersectionality around Māori women particularly, having been lower down the bands, gave me the knowledge to have those conversations with my people leaders going, hey, I actually know that based on the research, Māori women, or women, particularly Māori women, are often disadvantaged in salary pay. So is it okay if you just check that I'm not, below scale? And that led to a positive outcome. So, at an individual level, but also at an organisational level, these are the kinds of things that we can be having conversations about in a really curious way, or courageous, depending how you look at it. I like curious because it takes away the fear of the conversation that you're about to have, and actually just go, oh, what about this?
Cool. Well
Cool.
done.
What's that word you use?
Intersectionality.
No, that one's too hard for me. Epiphany.
Epiphany. Yeah.
Lightbulb moment.
Yes.
So I got a couple of lightbulb moments. One was within New Zealand, and had ex-serviceman, and he was in charge of a lot of our operations staff, Australian. Yeah, and he wanted like basic me lessons, and he kept coming up to me saying, oh, you can teach me this, but I have to apologise, my pronunciation is terrible. And so we got him to a level where he had an awkward Australian Suhoi accent, dropped the G's and everything. And,
true.
And so we got him to that level, and he was like, yeah, I'll always apologise for my pronunciation. And I go, you've got an excuse, you weren't brought up here. So I used this Pākehā Australian fella as competition. And so every opportunity I got, get up, do your mihi. And so it made everybody else go, oh, I've got no excuse now for correct pronunciation, for not starting my meetings in this way. And so so that was one. And then the other one was, and I think it actually started around cultural text, was 3 of us were having whakawhanaunga tanga around beverages, not water, about 5 years ago. And we saw these young Māori corporates dressed, looked mean, and we all had this memory saying, man, I remember when I was that young, and it was just so hard to support or get support around why we should correctly pronounce names and words and matariki. I gave my example of matariki, and they were like, yeah, I always get asked about matariki too, and I don't know that much about matariki. So we, from that whakawhanaungatanga session, started whāriki, which was about supporting corporate Māori to probably help their cultural tax go down. And then from their corporate whāriki movement, it moved into the Māori business network that it is now, and that just started from Māori wanting to support one another, and then that went into its own movement, and then we created this other one, which we're all a member of, called Tāpiri, and I suppose it's still a Tāpiri is about that, how do we support each other so that others are paying our tax for this cultural tax aspect. So I suppose that's my little rant, bro.
Yeah. Well, you look at whāriki, man, it's gone from strength to strength, and now it's it's going national and doing awesome stuff. Really cool. What about yourself, Selfie Hall?
Yeah, I like what he said and what Kirstin said. I think relationships, support, and understanding what is taxing and what is reward. And that's about our values. So it helps that in Westpac I've got this amazing CE who does his mihi. So we had this moment, we went to an iwi, and it was a, rangatira to rangatira moment, and I'm sitting there going, oh yeah, okay. So he stands up and he just all into the Māori from the start right down to the end, and then just sits down, and I'm like, yes!
Oh, nice.
But he also didn't take up oxygen, like he didn't stay standing and then explain it all in English. He just did his mihi, said it really well. Was thoughtful, sat down, and all the iwi, man, you nailed that. I was like, yes.
Awesome.
Yes. And so, because he nailed it because he believed it. And when he talked to them, he didn't say, I'm the CEO of this organisation, because he's like, well, everyone knows because I just, I'm here. But his thoughts were, like he said, I'm from, I was brought up in Taniwha, and I'm from, that's where I was brought up. That's where my values are. That's where my heart is. And, I'm here to listen and to be of service to you. And so, that was powerful.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's when, I suppose for me, that's that epiphany, when you know that actually, when you're not the person actually having all the ideas or doing everything, and other people in the organisation have taken that leadership role to embed a cultural norm, then it's a really awesome feeling, because that tax is no longer there, it's sundry,
Yes.
And I think we were one of the first banks to put Te Reo Māori onto the ATMs. And so everyone's like, oh man, Fonteyn, that was cool. I said, yeah, no, it wasn't me. It's like, that's way past my skills. But these guys, they went, Fonteyn, they want us to put Mandarin and Cantonese, but that's not our first, that's not our language. We want Te Reo Māori. And so they went through it, and that's how it got onto our ATMs.
Wow.
They just wanted to normalise the use of Te Reo Māori and use ATMs as that mechanism, because that's who we are. And it was in all the communities. So, I said, look, there's just stuff that people do, and I couldn't even think of it, but I'm happy to support it. And for me, that wasn't taxing. That was like, that's the benefits of being able to be part of a recipient of when other people pay the tax.
Cool. And you raise a good point around, if I think of Microsoft and Microsoft New Zealand, we've got our country manager and managing director, Vanessa, who you guys know, and she's awesome. She's passionate about Te Ao Māori and supporting Māori, and through her, my sort of how I use the cultural tax sort of thing to work for me is having those strong supporters and allies, awesome allies, to help drive positive change for our culture, which led through to lots of conversations around the world, and ultimately launching our global diversity pillar, Indigenous at Microsoft. And then being named the co-chair of it as well. So there's definitely a personal thing that I'm happy, really happy about. But ultimately, I want to see the outcomes from that, so that how do we change the culture? So it's not about us trying to get Māori, but changing ourselves so that Māori want to come and work at Microsoft. And then secondly, how do we put an Indigenous lens across all of our software and technologies, so that Māori feel comfortable using it. And so that's something. Just recently we've put Te Reo Māori across all of our Office products and Teams products, and we've got a rangatira, Anne, who leads education. She's helped drive that kaupapa, and many other people within Microsoft too. So that's been an awesome experience too.
Nice.
So Whānau, we've got a few questions I just want to throw out there. Any advice for people thinking about corporate mahi, but perhaps think, nah, it's not for me?
Corporates are pretty big, I'd say, there's a few influences in terms of where we are. Like, we're here more than for the job. It's how people put us there. So I suppose in these types of roles, if you're jumping in this type of role for the money, whānau, find a different mahi, because we're in it for more than that. Actually, that's a result of why we are in these roles. If that was the question, finding a Māori specific role. Ultimately, I think where we want to be in the next 10 years is you don't need these roles, because Aotearoa just Māori anyway. Māori by thought.
Kia ora.
So no matter what your ethnic background, there's still quite a strong Māori values. It's I think we're getting there. Corporate New Zealand has worked and even within corporates have worked in silos so long, so I think even 3 years ago, every corporate was trying to compete against who said kia ora first in Māori language. And now we're in this saying, okay, if you do that one, then we'll do this one, and we'll do that. So we've all got the same customer. So if our customer can go on a real journey where Vodafone, they're calling up to complain about Westpac, or they're ringing up using their phone.
I think it's in New Zealand flights credits.
They've just had their loans approved and they're just going to fly down to, I don't know, Southland on Air New Zealand, but that whole, and then they're also using their Microsoft
Teams.
Yeah, on Teams, nice bro, but there's a real journey. There's a real journey. Just thought I'd throw that one out there, but I think that's, ultimately, I don't see why we shouldn't have an excuse for our roles. Like I hate going back to the treaty, but 1840, did they have a Māori specific role to help those rangatira sign the treaty? Oh, and if they did, far out, we're in trouble. But
they're good ministers.
Yeah, but I think that's a good KPI for us. Is in 10 years' time, you don't need Māori specific roles because the value system will be just integrated throughout our society.
Tautoko, totally. I say, no mai hara mai, welcome, come, we're here for you. And I think, what COVID showed me is that we're out there, and now we're in a space where we're reaching out and we're connecting and we're finding each other. So while historically corporate has been seen to be quite a lonely place, through these connections and through these hononga like whāriki and like tāpiri, you're not actually that alone as you thought you may have been. And the more you put your fingers out, for me, I spent a lot of time this year just getting over my whakama, my shyness of reaching out. But once I got through that, man, the world's just opened up, and there's so many of us, and it's awesome, and it's a really beautiful thing because, I go back to the Vodafone Aotearoa thing, but what it was kaupapa over competition, and these are spaces that we can be together and we can collaborate and we can synergise for the betterment of our whānau and our community. So, and our job is to make it better for you when you come, and your job is to make it better for others when they come.
Kia ora. That's a good whakatauki, man. Nice. Any non-Māori heroes you've encountered in corporate roles, and why did they have such a positive impact on you? I guess you've got one, which is their mentor, who helped you sort of...
I think there's many. I think being in diversity and inclusion, diversity is that, I explain it as that point where you see the differences, and inclusion is where you accept them. And so sometimes, you're able to look in a room, you go, oh man, there's too many white fellas in here. And that's your diversity eyes, because you're trying to look for you. But when you go in and you accept who's in the room, and then you have like deeper conversations, you realise that actually that David, who's from Taniwha, is probably more aligned to my values than someone who's actually, brought up somewhere else, in Australia. And you're kind of going, so you can't trust your eyes sometimes in regards to that point of looking for a friend. So I always talk about the friends. Be open, kind, compassionate, open and curious. And when you're led by curiosity, you don't let your biases stop you from pursuing a conversation to seek further help. And humility, I suppose for me, our whānau was brought up in manaaki. Whoever turns up, that's who they are, and you just open up your cupboard and they come in, and that's what you do. So totally from the marae and farming and everywhere, and it's, my uncle Toko was amazing at it at Te Poho Marae, and he could make a connection, and it's like, uncle, they're from South Africa and you're saying you're related? Whatever, and he's like, oh yeah, it's the whakapapa dear, you just got this. And so because of that, the manaaki of my uncle was legendary. And so I suppose when you're looking for the heroes, I think most of it is your own mindset, is how open are you to be accepting of difference.
And if I can just build on one thing around mindset, and one thing that I personally find challenging working in corporate is, you know, there's a dual role that you play, and it's kind of about when you go back to your whānau, and you know, sometimes with your whānau you're seen as the corporate Māori, and then when you're in corporate you're seen as the Māori in corporate, and so too brown to be white and too white to be brown is the kōrero, and sometimes the tension that we sort of sit within, and I haven't figured out a way to work through that yet, but you know, having people that you're connected to that support you through those kinds of kaupapa is really helpful, and that's already here. But just I really would have liked to have had that insight a little bit earlier to prepare myself and build my resilience around.
Kia ora.
Yeah, it's quite a hard case, bro. Like when I go back to the marae and then you hear the aunties, see you're doing well in your job, and I walk into the whareka and they're like, seeing all this stuff coming across TV and you know, the kaupapa Māori, and then I'm like, yeah, auntie, I'm just about to start talking about myself, and they go, grab a tea towel. And so, you know, the good thing about going back to the marae is your marae is so grounded, it's hard for you to leave Earth.
Yes. Yes.
And then the other one is...
All cousins.
All cousins, yeah, because I'd rather aunties, because cousins are a bit harsh, eh? Please don't be that honest. And I suppose the other one is that whole thing about too brown to be white and too white to be brown. Yeah, that's a hard one, because in the corporate side you manage to get things across the line, or you've managed to pull things back from the wrong side to get back onto the right side, and then you go home and then you're paying a whole different type of cultural tax, because you're not pleasing everybody, and the ones at home are probably so honest that that you just have to have a really awesome sense of humour to get through some of the criticism, eh?
Aye.
So our whānau way, well, my experience, while we struggle to put our hands up for leadership roles, we don't shy away from criticising our own. My experience.
Yep. Definitely, I feel that too. And you know, you've my whānau keep me grounded, which I love, but in particularly my mum will always, you know, she's not backwards in coming forwards about things which, you know, I love as well. So another pātua here is, any advice for young Māori who can break out of their shell in the corporate world, and how they can use their voices constructively?
So my son, who's 20, said, Mum, Westpac is just McDonald's turned around.
Ooh,
I mean,
okay.
Awesome. So you're not working for us, son? Is that
is that what you're saying?
Said, you know, could you put it any other way?
Yeah.
Because he said, you know, it's service, you know, to be of service. And I said, well, that's manaaki, son. That's what we do, and that's how we are. And he goes, nah, I want to be rich. I want to do as little as possible, and I want to be famous. And I was like, oh, my son. Yeah, look, I'm not sure what corporate that is. And so, you know, like, I think there are many, like, I look across corporates and government, and it provides a lot of encouragement around a lot of the things that are happening for rangatahi, especially rangatahi, and they're amazing. Like, it's technology, it's science, it's engineering, it's, you know, if you want a pathway in, you don't have to look far. And I think, you know, it's deciding where to go, but also, you know, sometimes when you're young and enthusiastic, it's how humble are you to accept that sometimes you've got to start at a small role to work your way up, and that the fame doesn't come just because you want it, son. Because it's a little bit of work. So,
I mean, I certainly, I just met with a young fella this week, and he's like, what? You know, he's just started out in a role. I won't mention the company, but he was like, yeah, but I'm going to leave. I was like, oh, you only been there for 6 months? And he's like, yeah, but, you know, I'm not sort of, you know, making an impact, and yet we want to be able to have an impact that's wider than us and bigger than us, but it's going to take time, for you to move into those positions within a corporate where you can do those kind of things. But I guess for our young ones as well, that they're much more motivated and they want to come out and they want to change the world, which is awesome. But also corporates, you've got to do your time, you've got to work out how the system works as well. That's definitely my personal experience anyway.
Well, tū kind of taina tū, you know, like when you, it's, I think sometimes, you know, like I look at us and I think, you know, if there are, you know, rangatahi who are interested, happy to have a coffee, and had this young man and he said, oh, can I, you know, meet you, can I buy you a coffee? He was broke as. He goes, oh, I've got this. I was like, no, it's okay. I'm working. You know, I've got it. But just the gesture, like, and I went, wow, that's amazing. So he was willing to pay for it, even though I knew he was broke. And then he sat down, he said, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And, you know, gave him advice and connected him. And he was just grateful and thankful. And so, yeah, for that, for him, I went, here, have this. And was, you know, more than happy to connect, because he knew that he was going to actually do the mahi and be able to kind of go through. And I suppose that's that alignment of my values with someone. Cool. And just saying, you know, I'll invest in you if that's what you want, and I'm happy to invest in a coffee, you know.
I think just to build on that, you know, in the corporate sector, we're hungry. We're hungry for Māori, we're hungry for Pacifica, we're hungry for diversity. And so there are so many programs that bring diversity into organisations, and we call that corporate social responsibility and CSR. So if you're thinking about corporate, have a look on the website and look at the CSR programs that are there to give you an idea about what that corporate looks like and if there is alignment with purpose. And I think the other thing that, you know, Fonteyn, you mentioned it previously, is that I advocate is mātauranga Māori is a skill set, and it's a scarce and sought after skill set, and it should be rewarded, recognised and remunerated appropriately. So I think, you know, for our people in that rangatahi Māori mā, Pacifica mā, that are being asked to contribute over and above their roles, then that's an opportunity for you to flip that cultural tax and actually build your, I just thought of it in this wānanga, how do we build cultural credit? So that we're actually moving it out, bringing it out, and going into a place of, oh, I don't know the finance terms, but, you know, in a, what's the opposite of deficit?
Credit.
Credit, kia ora. Moving into a space of credit, so that we can start strengthening ourselves and our positions and reinforcing, you know, that we're here and we're here for a purpose and that we can contribute for better outcomes. So, and the only other thing I'd say on that recognition is it depends on what you, as an individual, how you like to be recognised. Some people, it's engagement, which is what volunteerism has been built on, and they just want to give to the company, and it adds to the company's employee value proposition. Or it might be remuneration, or it might be, you know, career opportunities. So, yeah, those are some other things to think about.
Ka pai. And I suppose when we think about whāraki, you know, which is that uses that Māori superpower to benefit when we can come together and collaborate and support each other in these environments, which is tāpiri as well. So, you know, I really encourage those young ones to get involved in those networks that are out there as well. So, all right, whānau, we're at our time. We've got to wrap up. I just want to mihi kia koutou for your whakaaro and just your aroha for this topic. And yeah, I know you guys are busy as well, so time away from your whānau. Really appreciate that too, and just mihi to your ancestors for you know, this awesome these tūranga that you guys hold, guys and girls hold, and the impact that you're making in your communities. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Nō reira e te whānau, thank you very much for joining us today as we talk about cultural tax, and hopefully you've been inspired and really keen to keep connecting. We've got our Ngā Taniwha page on Facebook, so feel free to jump on there, and we'll be having other events as we go into next year. Really lovely to have you. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi nui.